Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation of Get Kick in the Ass and Move On. The objective of our talk is to give you the keys to introduce continuous testing in your team. Before we start, I would like to remind you what we are talking about. Continuous testing is the integration of testing into the software delivery pipeline. This means that testing and its execution is part of a flow, a set of activities automated as much as possible and triggered every time code is added to the product. This process required a massive use of automation. With Valentin, we are going to summarize these steps that we consider essential to achieve such a goal. This is definitely an adventure in itself, and we will go through it today. Valentin and I have been IT professionals for about 15 years. Both of us have held different roles in different companies. But what we have in common is that we had to transform a group of testers together. Probably you all know these situations, being part of a large organization which embraced agility in the last 10 years. Again, we've been there. It went more or less well, but it happened. It is now rare to find an organization that claims a waterfall approach. In recent years, organizations have turned to DevOps, which encourage continuous testing, continuous deployment, and continuous delivery practices. This in addition to continuous integration, which is widely encouraged by agile practices. Today, almost all organizations have initiated their DevOps transformations, and those that have not done so are clearly laggard in Everett Rogers classification. But if we look at the last category of this classification, what are their initial practices regarding testing?
We often find an almost exclusive presence of manual testing in this kind of organization. There may be some automation initiative, but they are often very late in the game, meaning that tests are often automating long after the code has been written, and even after the feature has been delivered, even though they are already in use in production. If you're considering automating your test, but you're only automating those that exist and have already been run manually, then you're probably checking this box.
Another characteristic of these organizations is the value of tests performed. For many reasons, their test catalog is very large, with many tests, but few of them are executed at each release. They say they don't have time to test everything. That means many tests can be ignored because they are considered as low value. If you run a small portion of your test catalog at each release, or if your testing efforts are concentrated at the end of your sprint, then you probably check this box too.
It's not surprising that organizations that are behind the curve are also the ones that have the most difficulty transforming. Resistance to change, inflexible approval processes, use of archaic tools are major indicators, in my opinion, of an organization in the tail end of the race. The symptoms: do you have to plan when you want to introduce innovative concepts? Do you make test plans in Word documents? Do you use Excel as your test tracking tool? You're probably checking off a lot of boxes. No judgments, we've all been there. Unless you're part of a Silicon Valley startup, we all know more or less this kind of situation. And the testing business doesn't help. For a long time, large organizations have invested less in testing activities and in the transformation of testing practices than elsewhere. I have personally seen organizations where it was considered normal for a test analyst to be paid 50% less than a developer. Both came from the same university software engineering program. Lack of investment is the last glaring sign that you are one of the laggards. Okay, now the good news. Your organization has decided to change. For a couple of months or a couple of years, you've been hearing that it is now time to bring innovation and modern practices to software engineering. There seems to be some movement, and gradually QA practices is coming in the picture. You have to automate testing, but where to start?
I came to see Valentin one day in a similar context. I had to introduce automated testing in my team, and I was asked to plan it. I had to identify the steps, the schedule, the resources, and of course the cost of all of this. One day, I called Valentin for help because I was struggling with the cost estimates.
This is the day I kicked your ass, right?
And that day, I should have stayed at home. Valentin methodically dismantled all the planning I had done, explaining to me for each point why I was wrong. And in fact, I was making a very common mistake. I was trying to plan the transformation. We knew a little or nothing about test automation. My team had no experience with it, and yet I wanted to determine in advance what it was going to cost us and how long it will last. Don't make that mistake. That's the first things we would like you to remember today. Overplanning does not make sense when you are dealing with something you don't know. It's better to be in an attitude of exploring and discovery rather than overplanning.
Overplanning may also be a symptom of the fear of change. We plan because we are not used to the unknown, to evolve in a context where the unpredictable is to be expected. However, it is necessary to take the plunge, and this is what we invite you to do. To start introducing test automation as a practice, give yourself a goal. The one we are proposing is continuous testing. We want to be able to automatically launch our automated test suite with every application code increment. Better than that, we want these tests to allow us to make a decision. If we can't tell if the product is right for us after these tests, we haven't automated the right thing. Not that we want to automate enough tests. This is not about a number. It's about the confidence level. It doesn't matter how many tests you have to achieve this goal. The real goal is your confidence in the software.
It's not easy to forget notions like test coverage or number of tests, especially when you are doing something that is unknown. It's also complicated to build a team of experienced test engineers. So you are more likely to start with a team of beginners. A good thing we recommend is to start by getting everyone up to speed on the tools. To do this, we suggest a day during which your entire test team is present with a simple goal. Each of them has to be able to write an automated test by the end of the day. Writing one test a day is not much, but that's not the real goal. The real goal is to move on, to start scripting. So of course, during that day, you will have to install all the tools on all your colleagues' laptops. Sometimes you will have to learn the basic of Git, discover or rediscover code editors. And since the team's goal will be for everyone to be able to write a test, you will probably have to help each other. In fact, that day is kind of a hackathon, a competition of your team against the unknown. And at the end of the day, your team will come out more united.
Let's talk about this team. From our experience, we believe that a good team is a diverse team. Of course, the base of the team should include a large share of testers. We know how curious and how capable testers are for breaking software. But you also have to think about one thing. Doing automated testing is doing a development project, so your team has to be willing to learn that. And it will be even better if you manage to include a developer with you. First, because sometimes you need to make addition to your test framework, but also because very often your developer will be your preferred coach to explain source code conflicts, programming subtleties, and so many other things your team will need. Still on the team, and still on the subject of coaching, consider specialized coaching. As we told you, building a full team of experienced people is probably impossible, but finding someone who is familiar with the practice of continuous testing will probably be very helpful. Not absolutely necessary, but very useful. This coach will give you a pass, probably avoid making the most common mistakes.
Okay, now you have a goal. You have a team of motivated people, and you are ready to jump in. Believe me, that's better than a plan. Say it out loud. Explain you don't know the detail and explain to your management that you don't know exactly where you are going. But stay sure of one thing, you are going to move. And you are convinced that it will be valuable. Did Columbus know he was going to discover America? Nope, but he was motivated and was convinced that something of value was at the end of the journey. Share the same transparency with your management because you will need them. Early day will be difficult. You will not produce as quickly as you would like. Be transparent about your progress. During the first sprint, you will automate maybe 5% of delivered stories. This may not seem like much, but it's normal. Announce your delay. If you have any, don't create surprises. The support of your hierarchy will be important because they will have to make investments.
Training is probably the most important investment you will need to make. So there are great sources of free training on the internet, and we recommend Test Automation University, of which Angie Jones is one of the main instigators. But the amount of time your team is going to have to spend on training is going to be quite significant. Here's an example of the investment your management will have to make. With a clear goal, a motivated team, willingness to learn, support, and getting moving, you have everything in your hand.
Yes, everything will be in your hands. But the adventure is not over. Continuous learning is for the entire team. It took us some time to learn how to do the right tests. Because we have learned something. Automated testing is not about automating your manual tests. There is something more, a way of thinking about testing that's different from the one we had when we were only doing manual testing. After a few months, we probably threw away a lot of what we did at the beginning. Why? Because we understood how test automation and continuous testing should apply to our context. It was different from what we thought at the beginning. So that's also why we don't recommend that you start by automating existing tests. Wait until you have some maturity, until you are sure what form automated testing should take in your context. And then, and only then, you will establish guidelines. Use these guidelines to rethink your existing tests and automate them the right way.
It's probably at this point, and only at this point, that you will want to bring in an external team, based on principles you have written yourself. Because you mature in practice, you can ask an external team to rewrite the existing test and automate them. We find this more beneficial than the opposite approach, which is to bring in an external team at the beginning, which doesn't know the product or your context, and which should build an automated practice, hoping that your team will adopt it after all. Finally, we would like to give you some recipes for guaranteed success or almost. In addition to the fake hackathon, which has proven its value for a good start, let's first recall the importance of team member with a developer profile. This will save you a lot of time. In the 3 or 6 months following your startup, you will have to deal with sometimes complicated maintenance of your automated test. A first solution, according to us, is to quickly classify them into different groups. A first group of smoke tests, which contains a small number of tests that allow you to quickly determine if the product seems to be well deployed and if the test environment is up. Don't run any other test if any of these smoke tests fail. You will probably save a lot of time in analysis. A second group that contains all the robust tests, which are well written and which you are sure that if they fail, there is a bug in the product. A third group which contains the tests that are not yet robust enough to be in the stable group. A continuous improvement activity for your team will be to make this group as small as possible by thinking about tests differently using stubbing, data generation, or any other technique you discover over time.
You talk about continuous improvement, so let's say a word about that. We've implemented, after a few months of practice, a special day that we called Automation Friday. Imagine something like a retro, a dedicated time, for instance at the end of a sprint, where we focus our attention on improving our practice. I give you a list of topics: how to solve test flakiness, experimentation with tagging on test case, how to leverage a feature to improve or speed up feedback, or last example, exploring new tool and seeing it will bring us any values. Trust me, we found a lot of value by dedicating time in improving ourselves as a team.
One last thing before we leave you. We wanted to talk to you about this. It's important to measure yourself. We could spend a whole hour talking to you about measurement in continuous testing, but we'll summarize the metrics we think are essential in 3 main themes and 9 metrics in total. The ones that measure your progress in transforming your team are the test automation effort ratio and the team maturity metric. The first one, the test automation effort ratio, is very simple to measure. It is based only on timesheets, and unfortunately everyone does timesheets. This indicator will allow you to know how well you are doing things according to your objective. The second indicator is very useful when a team starts, but it is also useful afterward. It is a self-assessment. Each member of your team positions himself in a scale from 1 to 5 according to his level. Level 1 represents an absolute beginner, and level 5 an expert able to build a framework from scratch. The average of your team should progress constantly at the beginning until a certain sweet spot where your team will be comfortable and autonomous. Unfortunately, we won't be able to spend more time today on metrics, but notice one thing. We don't measure test coverage. There are good reasons for this. As we said, we could spend an hour talking about metrics, the importance of choosing the right ones, and especially not measuring too much. If you are interested, I suggest 2 things. Let us know. Shoot out in the chat here or in the survey that SourceCon will send you at the end of this great day. If we see that you are interested, we will soon propose a talk about it. Another option is, if you want to know more about continuous testing and the way to get there, Henri and I have recently written a little novel about the subject. It has been available for some time, and we are quite proud to have very good and warm feedbacks. For SourceCon, we applied a 50% discount on the ebook version available on Amazon. Now it's time to take your questions. I hope there are many.